let's talk a little bit about COVID and what we have been through, and why maybe there's a lot of sort of confusion, not even confusion, but misconceptions about what's going on out there. As of today, we've got close to 400,000 Americans that have died from COVID-19. The vast majority of those people that are dying are nursing home bound patients, a lot of patients with comorbidities. And I don't know how much Rob has seen at the VA. I'm sure you're seeing a lot at Eskenazi. I don't know if they're routing them from the VA or not, but I mean, we have periods of time where our hallways are full of COVID-19 patients, or ICUs are filled. Then we have other days where it's not as bad. It's a horrible, miserable way, unfortunately, of dying. It's a respiratory illness. We are so much better at managing COVID-19 now than we were back in February. And when you look at COVID-19, when Rob and I were first getting involved in this, or when we were first sort of thrown into the mix, I mean, it was a terrifying time for us because, we didn't know the pathophysiology of this illness. We didn't know if every day we were going to work, if this is the last day we were going to be healthy. We know we're going to die by the end of the week. I mean, most of, people like Rob and I, we were calling our attorneys and our people that are handling our money and telling our wives, our husbands, where our passwords were to our computers. I mean, we were preparing for the worst. So, there's a level of relief that I think, Rob, I'm sure you can speak to it too, and I have now over where we are in terms of this. And one of the things I will tell you, there isn't a partner in my group or a nurse in our ER that didn't climb over themselves to get this vaccine the minute it became available. And if the people that are in the middle of the worst involving COVID-19 are climbing over themselves to get vaccinated, that should send a crystal clear message to everybody else in America and everybody in this community that this is what you need to do in order to stay safe from this virus.
Yeah.
Weigh in?
Yeah, I mean, this vaccine is a modern miracle. I mean, if we ever see one in our lifetime, I think this might be it. I mean, it is truly a miracle of science. It's a miracle of ingenuity. It is such a huge accomplishment, and I am thrilled to say that I've been fully vaccinated. I know, Lou, you have too. And to feel that safety net for the first time in almost a year is a really profound feeling that everyone deserves to have, not just us. So unfortunately, there's a lot of myths and a lot of misconceptions and a lot of confusion and a lot of misinformation out there. So hopefully we can clear up some of that tonight.
But, there's a reason why all our nurses and doctors are posting pictures of themselves on social media getting the vaccine. It's because of the tremendous level of relief that this has. So, maybe we can sort of address why this is sort of unique, why this is, I don't want to say it's experimental. It really isn't. It really wasn't as rushed as you think. This technology, this mRNA vaccine technology, had been out for a while. They had been looking at mRNA vaccines actually as a form of cancer therapy, because all you're doing is you're taking a little strand of code. Think about it as the blueprints to create a certain product. Say let's say it's the instruction guide on how to create spaghetti in your house, okay? And you throw that piece of that blueprint into your house, and all of a sudden your house starts making spaghetti. And that's essentially what it's doing. It's throwing a little bit of RNA into your cells, and they start spitting out the spike protein of the virus. They're not creating live virus. They're not altering your DNA. They're giving you a piece of mRNA, which is just code, and it's to teach your body to make spike protein, the protein that is responsible for the infectivity of COVID-19. And when that spike protein enters your bloodstream, what it does is it triggers your body to create an immune response, antibodies and memory cells, that when the real virus comes in, it recognizes it and attacks it. Now, there's some confusion because people get mRNA or RNA confused with DNA. DNA is the code for everything that allows your body to function. Everything that your body does is based on DNA. Now, there's certain viruses, what we call retroviruses, that can take RNA and they can convert it into DNA. Things like HIV, which is a retrovirus, and Ralph sarcoma virus, and other types of sort of rare viruses. But they require what's called a sort of an induction sequence, a little piece of code that turns that RNA protein on, or RNA strand on. That code does not exist on this strand of RNA. It has zero chance of incorporating itself into your DNA. So what it does is it spits out a ton of protein, of spike protein, and then your body creates antibodies to that spike protein, and that confers immunity. So then the question is, do we know how long this immunity lasts? No, we don't. Okay, we also don't know how long the immunity lasts from your getting infected from coronavirus at the beginning. We don't know. But the immunity that is conferred from the vaccine is actually probably bigger than the immunity conferred from getting the viral, just the viral infection itself. Because people say, well, I got infected by the virus, I'm immune. Well, actually, you're probably not, because we do know that immunity will start to diminish, and that the immunity from the vaccine is probably a sustained immunity. We just don't know how long. And think about it from an influenza standpoint. You guys have to get vaccinated about every year from influenza. So the influenza vaccines, they can fluctuate in efficacy from anywhere from 50 to 70% in a given year. The efficacy on this vaccine is looking like it's 90 to 95%. That is just mind-boggling good. Okay, it's incredible. So Rob, you want to weigh in on some of that, or what you
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a great summary of how the vaccine works. I know there's a little bit of question as to what the 95% means and what the 5% means. The primary endpoint in the studies for Pfizer and Moderna, those are the ones that we're really talking about when we're talking about the mRNA. We're looking at clinically detectable disease. That means any symptoms of any kind. So if you are in the 95% group, that means zero symptoms. You have a 95% chance of having no symptoms if you do get infected with COVID-19. Now that 5% means that you could have symptoms. The chances of you being in the hospital or dying from it are essentially zero, though. In the trial, which had over 44,000 people for Pfizer and over 30,000 for Moderna, they separate. Half the group gets a placebo, or they're in the control group, and then the other half gets the vaccine, and no one knows, who gets what. So Pfizer, for example, had 44,000 participants. I'm just going to use Pfizer as an example. So 22,000 got placebo, meaning nothing, and 22,000 got the vaccine. Only one out of those 22,000 ended up in the hospital who got the vaccine. 9 of the placebo group ended up in the hospital. They had what was called a severe adverse event, or a major health concern. So that's the primary endpoint, is whether or not you have clinically detectable, so any symptoms of any kind, disease from COVID. 95% of those vaccinated, fully vaccinated, not just one vaccine. You got to get both. You got to get the booster. It doesn't count fully if you only get one. That is some protection, but we're talking about the full course of the vaccine. 95% of people will have no symptoms. Now, we don't know if you can still be infected or not. We're just talking about sickness here, right? If you don't get sick, you're not going to end up in the hospital. You won't end up dying or have any of those catastrophic things happening. We don't know if you can still get infected or not. You may be able to still get infected. You may still be able to transmit it to others, which is why you guys have probably heard this term herd immunity thrown around now for months and months and months. And we need somewhere between 70 and 85% of the population in this country to get vaccinated to truly curb this thing and start eliminating transmission of the virus. Once we get that percentage of the population immunized, the virus will die out. That's assuming it doesn't mutate or some other catastrophe doesn't happen in the meantime. But that's why it's so critical that we spread this message to as many people as possible. Coronaviruses are notorious for mutating. As I'm sure you already know, there are multiple strains. There are new strains that have appeared in the UK and in South Africa. So we really are trying to drive home the point that this is not only a safe vaccine, but a very, very effective vaccine as well. So yeah.
And different diseases have different levels of herd immunity. One of the reasons why we probably need a higher percentage of people in this country vaccinated for COVID-19 is because the transmissibility of this is so much greater than anything we've encountered, really. I mean, this is a lot worse than flu. I mean, it's a lot easier to get COVID-19 than it is to get influenza, and the catastrophic outcomes and the fatality ratio of COVID-19 is exponentially higher. And, you know, we also don't know what the long-term effects of COVID-19 infections are, even in people in their 40s and 50s. You know, there's some talk about sort of, you know, are we seeing long-term lung damage in people? Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if you look at the CAT scans that Rob and I see on these people, you're like, how could they not have some degree of permanent disability from a pulmonary standpoint? So we've got to keep the general population safe from this. Now, one of the things, I think one of the questions somebody put out up there was, what about the risk of anaphylaxis? Statistically speaking, it's zero. I mean, literally zero. It's like 1 in a million, but your risk of dying from COVID is thousands of times greater than that. And even if you do have an anaphylactic reaction, you're getting the vaccine in a place that manages anaphylaxis. I mean, they're nurses. We have EpiPens. We'll fix you. Okay, we're right there. The people administering them, I mean, they prepare for this. But I mean, you go to the doctor blog sites, nobody's seeing that kind of stuff. And then there's questions about fertility and everything like that. Listen, it's safe. It's a couple little basic biological components. I don't believe there's any problem with it. I think Rob feels that way. All our doctors feel that way. It's get vaccinated.
I've spoken to multiple allergists about this. There should be no concern. You know, they recommend that you wait for 15 minutes right after you get the vaccine in case something does happen. If you have asthma, severe food allergies, severe allergic reactions to vaccines in the past, there's some recommendations that maybe you wait an additional 15 minutes, so 30 minutes total. But yes, the rate is about 1 in a million for any vaccine. Now, as we have millions of people hopefully getting the vaccine, we may see something like that. But this vaccine, the contents, you can look up the ingredients online. There's not many complicated ingredients in there. There's something called polyethylene glycol, which is in cosmetics and toothpaste. Some people, I mean, very rare, are allergic to that. You would certainly know that already. And so, that should not be a concern at this point. And I like, Louis, what you said about this not changing your DNA. It also cannot cause COVID. I want to make sure that that's crystal clear. By the way, the flu vaccine doesn't cause the flu either, but that's another point. This does not cause COVID. It does not cause infertility. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists are recommending that pregnant women have access to the vaccine if they choose to get it. If you already got COVID-19, we still recommend that you get the vaccine at some point. You're not immune, like Louis said. And I think the other myth out there is that one vaccine is better than the other. Between Moderna and Pfizer, get the one that you can get. They're equivalent.
Don't cancel your appointments either. And I kid you not, okay? Especially our community. Well, I got something to do that week. Something came up. I'm going to cancel. You don't. If you get an appointment for that vaccine, you go. You do not miss your appointment for that vaccine. One of the questions, too, was, what about the stockpiles? Realize that Rob was saying we have to have 2 doses of the vaccine, okay? So whatever amount that has been given, you have to have that amount on reserve in order to double dose people. So you got to think about, they've got to have 2 doses for every person. Indiana has actually done a pretty damn good job in terms of vaccinating people. We're ahead of most states in terms of numbers and efficiency. I have relatives that have flown back in from Florida just to get their vaccines because it's so tough right now to get on the list there. So we're doing something right. The minute it becomes available in your age group, get on the CDC's website, the Indiana Board of Health, dial 211, sign up and get vaccinated.
I see a couple questions here popping up on the chat. Will we need to get revaccinated on an annual basis? We don't know the answer to that. Time will tell. We're just too early in that process. How do we figure out when we and family members are eligible? Look, go to the Marion County Department of Health website. Call your local CVS, your Walgreens. I mean, this may take some effort. See if there's leftover doses at the end of the day. Once you thaw out the vaccines, you can't refreeze it. Those doses have to go in someone's arm or they get pitched. So see if there's a waiting list that you can get on. I know Community North right now. I know because my mom, who's in her 60s, just got the vaccine 2 days ago. They have a wait list that is brand new every day. And whatever leftover vials they have at the end of the day, they are allowing people to essentially walk in starting at about 6:40 p.m. at Community North.
Yeah, and I believe Fisher's has that too. A few other places do, but there's not a whole lot available. Typically, I mean, most people, it's usually 4 or 5 vaccines left over. They just call around somebody out in the parking lot or, somebody upstairs but, it's worth a try. Might as well. Rebecca asked a good question. In fact, it was funny. Rob and I were talking about this. Why haven't teachers been a priority in being vaccinated? My question, my response to that is, why isn't the checkout person at Kroger's, who's 60 years old, a priority in getting vaccinated? And I mean that sort of seriously. Duke University just came out with a big study. It was published in the American Academy of Pediatrics, the most prestigious journal in medicine. And the risk of transmission to teachers from students is really, really low. Okay, it's astronomically low. I mean, we toss it around as sort of this, and there's so much out there in social media about educators and stuff like that. But Rob and I'll tell you, the checkout person at Kroger's is at a heck of a lot greater risk of getting COVID-19 than the teachers. The data is really showing that to be the case. A young, healthy teacher, especially in a school district, really is not at that much of risk. But if you were an older teacher with comorbidities and co-risk factors, we have talked about this before, you probably should consider the leave of absence for the time being. But right now, I mean, it sounds good, okay, but there's thousands of essential jobs out there, and you have to sort of look at risk stratifying them. And right now, the greatest risk are the healthcare providers and people that are actively working with the elderly, okay? And because the elderly are the greatest risk of getting sick, and also, the people that we're taking care of, I mean, they're sick, so they have huge viral loads, much greater viral loads. So we're trying to spread some of that, break some of that misinformation out there, but the studies that literally have just come out show that the risk of transmission within the schools, you're much greater risk of getting COVID in the teacher's lounge than you are in the classroom.
Wow.
How long does it take for the vaccine, once administered, to provide protection to the person vaccinated? So that's a great question.
Good question. Go ahead.
So after the first dose, it probably of either Pfizer or Moderna, I'm not distinguishing between the two. It takes a couple weeks for your body to incorporate that RNA, to make the proteins, for your antibodies to start mounting an appropriate response and developing enough titers. So to provide any protection, probably a couple weeks. To provide full protection, it's got to be really a week or 10 days after the second dose of the Pfizer vaccine. And for Moderna, I think it's, what is it, Lou? It's about the same? Is it about a week?
Yeah, about
or
7
two?
to 10 days. Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody says 2 weeks because everybody wants to err on the side of caution. So,
2 weeks after the second dose of either, your goal.
Okay.
Yeah. So, so you're about in that time frame. I don't know if you've talked to anybody that's gotten COVID after getting the vaccine. I mean, I know people that got COVID, because they literally the next day, because they were getting sick the day they got the vaccine and ended up with COVID. But I don't know anybody that's gotten it after the second vaccine. There was a question about Mythbuster sites. Go to the CDC website. Go to the Indiana State Board of Health. Ignore everything else.
There's also I don't know if any of you know Dr. Aaron Carroll. He's a pediatrician, IU School of Medicine. He does blogs and he does interviews. He just posted a really great video on YouTube. You can find it with Dr. O'Brien, who's the director at the Department of Immunization, Vaccines, and Biologicals at the World Health Organization. I mean, he's a great resource, and he's a local pediatrician who's well established in the community. I would recommend him as well. And he's posting stuff all the time.
Another good one, which is entertaining, is Z-Dog. If you've never heard Z-Dog, Z-D-O-G-G, he's actually very entertaining, has some good stuff. But, stay off of Facebook, stay off of Google. just get vaccinated.
Can you wait longer than 3 or 4 weeks for the second dose? If you have something that delays you, get the second dose. But these were studied with very specific parameters, so you want to try to stay within the study window, because anything outside of that wasn't really investigated well. So if you want to be able to say with certainty you're in that 95% group, you got to stick to the guidelines. And they will make, in almost every case, they will make your second appointment before you leave the room after the first vaccine.
Yeah.
So bring your.
You don't have to kill yourself trying to get rescheduled. They'll be right there waiting for you on the way out.
But there is a window. You can be a couple days before or after the 3 week mark.
I think it's like 5 days. I think there's like a 10-day window of time. And remember, you're being scheduled at that date. So the same schedule just carries over. So the same number of people are going to be in that same block. So you're not going to be climbing over yourselves against other people. It's that same block of people in that window.
If you can still transmit COVID after being fully vaccinated, can you be tested to find out if you are a carrier? There's a question, I've sort of heard this, and I don't know where this comes from, but I guess the question is, can you get COVID? Can you carry COVID after you've been immunized? Yeah, I suppose you can, but the question is, can you expel enough virus, a viral load, to actually cause illness in somebody? It's one thing to carry virus, but it's another thing about, are you really going to still be transmissible at that time? This is where it sort of comes down to, I don't know, who knows? I mean, my gut instinct when you understand immunology is that you're not going to be able to carry enough viral load to really cause an infection in a normal human being, I would imagine, especially if you're vaccinated, because it's not like you've got this heavy viral infection in terms of illness that you're expelling out in a cough. It's one thing to carry some on your skin and the surface of your body or in your nasal passages. So I'm not sure I would worry about it. If you want to check your antibody titers at a later date to see if you have enough immune response, that's one thing. If you're still a real high risk individual, then you're going to still have to exercise caution probably for a long time until we have a better idea of what this is. But eventually it's going to come down to whose responsibility is it to prevent transmission. And eventually the tables are going to turn, and it's going to be the responsibility of the individual who's at risk of getting COVID-19 to protect themselves more than it is everybody else. That's just sort of the way the tide of illness goes. There's a difference between being a carrier and can you really actively transmit illness. Rob, you sort of froze up there for a while. Oh, okay.
I wouldn't worry about it that much, to be honest.
Yeah, I was going to say same. Any new or additional questions for our doctors?
Yeah, I have one for Lewis. And so the question is, how long do you think it's going to be before we get to that 70 to 85% mark? And how long do you think it'll be where we'll know that this thing is, the risks of transmission have been greatly diminished?
Well, I would imagine not until the end of summer would be my guess based on numbers. But I think that we will have the most vulnerable people in this country vaccinated, I think probably by the end of April would be my guess. And that's what you're really shooting for. You're really shooting to protect the most vulnerable portions of the populations first. Then we can work on the rest of the country. And then, God willing, it'll be a sustained immunity that we won't have to give boosters to. But we're vaccinating people at a pretty quick rate. And again, the ones that are most at risk are those over the age of 80. And, I think that we can get the vast majority of those vaccinated in the next couple months. And then hopefully we can work our way down from there. But, if we can get 70% of those over the age of 60 vaccinated by June, man, I would feel like that's a super victory for us as a country.
I have a question, Brian.
Sure, go ahead.
What are the issues with the supply of the vaccines? I mean, you hear in California they're running short. Here they have enough for the first dose. If you get the first dose, are you assured of the second dose? I mean, is there?
Well, that's what we were saying, is that you have to have enough. We have enough in reserve to make sure that once you have the first dose, there's enough for you to get the second dose. So you can't vaccinate more people than you have doses on the back end for, in case there's a glitch in the supply line on the backside. Because if you do, then everybody you just vaccinated, essentially the vaccine, I don't want to say becomes worthless, but the science is based on two vaccines. So you have to have enough. I mean, if you look at the state of Israel, for example, they're vaccinating a ton of people, and I wonder out loud sometimes, do they have enough in reserve to give a double dose? From everything I've read, it seems like they do. One of the things, and I mean, from a geopolitical standpoint, you can argue about everything you want in terms of politics in this country. One of the things we did right in this country was we bought a ton of vaccine and ramped up manufacturing when this was in phase 2 trials. Okay, this saved America in a lot of ways, because that's unheard of. Essentially what we were doing is we were rolling the dice, and we were betting that the vaccine, it looked like an animal study, was showing a good immune response. So we were telling Pfizer, and we were telling these companies, go ahead and manufacture vaccines. We're going to buy it. We don't even know if it works yet, and we're buying it. So they had ramped up manufacturing early on before it was even FDA approved. That's why all of a sudden you had all this vaccine ready. I mean, that's never happened in the history of medicine. Okay, so we had a lot of vaccine literally going out the door the next day. That's a good thing. You can only manufacture so much. It's not like you can just call another place and say, hey, start manufacturing mRNA vaccine. The technology required, the storage, the refrigeration, everything, it's unique. So we only have a limited ability to manufacture the stuff. The country's doing about as good as they can do, I think. Pfizer, Moderna, and hopefully Johnson & Johnson will be kicking one out, and a variety of other companies soon too, to help fill the voids.
Well, the news says that, or the TV says that both vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer, are both in the same range, the 90 to 95% range. Is there one better than another? Question number one. Or number two, I'm thinking that if you get the Pfizer first, you have to have the Pfizer second.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Yeah, no, you're supposed to have the same vaccine. Depending if you do, because they ask, if you go to the vaccine centers, they'll say, hey, what vaccine did you get, or can you show us the card? Did you get the Pfizer one? And they'll follow it up with the second Pfizer dose. In all honesty, the Moderna one's probably a little better from the standpoint, not from efficacy, but from standpoint that it probably is a little easier to handle. So the chances of the product degrading in terms of the mass distribution of the vaccine, it's probably a more potable vaccine, to rural areas. So it probably, from a manufacturing standpoint, is probably a little bit better. But the efficacy seems the same for both.
And
that's the one that doesn't have to be at minus 48
Right.
degrees or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, it's like minus 70 for Pfizer.
Yeah.
The other things, just talking about safety, is, Yes, I mean, we've never created a vaccine this quickly, but there were no shortcuts in terms of the science. There was no loss of scientific integrity. The safety was not compromised when they were making this thing. What changed, number one, was all the resources that were thrown at it, the money, the time, the effort between agencies. In the middle of a pandemic where you can test thousands of people at a time quickly in the trials, right? You've got 3 phases. Phase 1 and 2 are all about safety, and then phase 3 is all about, does it work? You've got 30,000 for the Moderna and 44,000 people for the Pfizer going on simultaneously. If you just have a few people sick here and there, you can't get a trial big enough to have any real meaning behind it. So there's that. And then, like Lou mentioned earlier, the advances in technology that has actually been around for probably the last 10 years. We just haven't had to create a vaccine like this one. There was a lot of shortcuts with bureaucratic stuff and getting sponsors and getting funding and all that stuff. But the one thing that was not compromised was safety. So that should be really important. I know a lot of people think that because this was rushed, it's somehow unsafe. That is just not the case.
There's been very few things in medicine that had tens of billions of dollars thrown into it, into a study in a matter of just months, which is what happened here. So most of the studies like this would take grant time and recruitment of people and countless medical centers. What was interesting, if you were on some of the doctor blog sites, social media groups, man, I'll tell you that everybody was trying to climb over themselves to try to get into these studies. The doctors were. And they all could tell whether they got placebo or whether they got real vaccine because they didn't have an immune response. And so they sort of knew. They said, oh, man, I got COVID. I know I was in the placebo group. They were these docs, that were in these studies, man, they were able to figure out early on whether they got the vaccine or not because they just weren't falling ill. And they had an immune response, whereas the ones who were in the placebo group, they knew. I mean, so that should tell you that these vaccines work. They're safe. And, the big question is how long will they confer immunity? That we don't know. You're going to have to be patient with that. Don't expect much. Okay. That's going to be years down the line before we have a really good understanding about the long-term immune potential for these vaccines.
A question. I was told that the second dose was a stronger booster than the first. Is that true, or are they both the same? You're getting 2 of the same.
Rob, you want to weigh in on that?
I believe they're the same.
Same, but yeah. But you'll have a stronger immune response typically to the second. Yeah, your pump's sort of been primed by the first one, and then the second one, you've got all these antibodies and memory cells that pump out a bunch of what we call mediators of immunity. I had a pretty significant immune response. I had a high fever and body aches for about 20 hours after it, but I didn't care, man. It was the best I've ever felt being sick in my entire life. I was like, thank God I'm sick. Okay, because this means I had an immune response. So when that happens to you, you raise your hand to the Lord and say, thank you.
Any other questions? Well, gentlemen, Louis and Rob, I can't thank you enough on behalf of the J for better educating us and relieving some of the myths that are out there.